I could smell the sharp smell of burning rubber as James's taillights disappeared into the darkness. My heart was racing in my chest as I stood there, speechless. How could he abandon me in the middle of nowhere and do this to his own wife? James! My voice echoed off the abandoned buildings surrounding me as I yelled, "James, come back!" However, he had vanished, leaving me by myself in this lonely area of the city. I hugged myself, attempting to combat the cold that had nothing to do with the outside temperature. I kept thinking about our quarrel in the car. "You're useless, Tiana," James had said, his hands white from staring at the steering wheel, even with maintaining a tidy home. "Which type of spouse are you?" I fought back tears and argued, "I'm doing my best. Your mother—" He slammed on the brakes and yelled, "Don't you dare bring my mother into this. Get out, now." The sight in his cold, heartless, and vicious eyes told me differently, even though I assumed he was kidding. I was aware of how far away I was from home now that I was standing on the broken pavement. My phone and handbag had remained in the car. All I had on was my clothing and the increasing awareness that my marriage was failing. A cluster of burly men stood around the corner, staring at me curiously. I picked up my speed in a frantic attempt to find a safe spot to call for assistance, like a diner or petrol station. "Hey, lady!" yelled one of the males. "You lost?" I walked faster, ignoring him. I sensed footsteps behind me, and my heart began to rush. A growly voice said, "I'm talking to you, sweetheart," drawing nearer. I was about to lose it when I noticed a neon sign in the distance that offered me salvation, a 24-hour restaurant. I started running and pushed through the door as bells jangled. I walked in abruptly, and the waitress behind the counter looked up, surprised. She said, "You okay, hun?" I shook my head, trying not to cry. "Can I use your phone, please?" With a nod, she pointed to an outdated payphone located in the corner. I struggled to remember Hazel's number as I fumbled with the receiver. As I phoned, my fingers trembled. "Hello?" On the third ring, Hazel replied in a drowsy voice. "Hazel," I said, "Tiana is here. I require urgent help." "Tiana, what's happening? Where are you now?" I looked around to see if there was a street sign. "I'm not sure. A restaurant on the eastern side. James departed from me here." "He what?" Hazel's tone hardened, forgetting she had slept. "That idiot. All right, stay still. I'm heading your way. What's the diner's name?" Clinging to the phone like a lifeline, I repeated the facts. "Hazel, I'm at a loss for what to do. Things are so terrible now." "We'll manage," she reassured me. "Just remain where you are. I'll arrive in 20 minutes. I saw my image in the soiled mirror above the payphone as I hung up. Pale and scared, I barely knew the woman gazing back at me. She was so different from the self-assured, self-reliant person I had been before I married James. With a worried expression on her tired face, the waitress walked over. "While you wait, sugar, would you want some coffee? Regarding the residence?" With gratitude, I nodded and trailed her to a booth. My thoughts strayed to better times as I sipped the bitter brew, including my supportive friends, my lovely apartment, and my work at the art museum. I had lost all that. When? The day I said I do to James Wilson. I stiffened, thinking that James had come back when I heard the bell above the door ding. It was simply a weary-looking truck driver making his way directly to the counter. I looked at my timepiece. Hazel would come in another 15 minutes, giving me another 15 minutes to plan my next move. I could never go back to the previous state of affairs. That much was certain. I silently promised myself that this humiliation would end this evening while I waited. I would do whatever it takes to be the lady I used to be. James, too? The day James left me standing in the dark by myself was a day he would regret. I staggered in the front door, exhausted after the night's adventure. After driving me home, Hazel insisted that I contact the police, But how could I respond? That my spouse had left me alone in a hazardous area of the city? Their tones were already laced with mistrust. "There you are," a high-pitched voice rang forth. "Have you been somewhere?" James has been nervous and ill. With my hands still on the doorknob, I froze. My mother-in-law, Mary, stood in the hall with her arms crossed and her lips pursed in disdain. James was lounging on the couch behind her, appearing unconcerned. I forced a grin and added, "Mary? I didn't think you would be here." "Well, someone had to be here for James," she murmured, "since his wife couldn't be bothered." I forced a laugh, telling myself Mary didn't have the full story. Or did she? James's smug expression from the couch made me question whether he had already thought up a story to paint me as the bad guy. "I apologize for troubling you, even though I knew it was a lie." There was a misunderstanding. Mary dismissively waved her hand. "Forget about it now. Tiana, the home is a wreck. I have been making an effort to clean, but my back is terrible." I looked around the spotless living room, and then back at Mary's look of martyrdom. "I'll handle it," I said in resignation. When I eventually made my way to the kitchen, James said something. "Bring me a beer, would you, babe?" I balled my hands, recalling his tail lights vanishing into the darkness. Mary, though, was observing with her beady eyes, not missing anything. I grudgingly nodded and made my way to the kitchen. When I was alone, I slumped against the counter and choked back tears. How has this happened to my life? Serving a guy who had abandoned me and a lady who appeared to take pleasure in my suffering. My pocket had a buzzing phone. Hazel was checking in. I quickly replied on my phone, telling her that I was all right, but was I really? "Tiana," Mary's voice sounded. "Is James's beer somewhere?" I went back to the living room and got a can out of the refrigerator. Mary tutted at the condition of the coffee table as James accepted it without saying thank you. She ran a finger across the immaculate surface and added, "Really, Tiana, I don't know how you expect to keep a husband if you can't even keep a tidy home." I told her, my patience waning, "I work full-time, Mary, and I try my best to—" "Apologies, excuses," she cut in. "Women were able to manage both work and home life in my day. Is that correct, James?" James agreed with a groan, his gaze fixed on the television. Something inside of me snapped. I shook my head and replied, "You know what? I'm done. I'm heading to bed." Mary gave a start as if I had smacked her. However, the food. James also needs to eat dinner. James turned to face me, and at last he looked up. "You abandoned me in a hazardous neighborhood," I stated in a menacingly low voice. "You can cook that damn dinner on your own." That being said, I raced upstairs, disobeying Mary's halting objections. With my pulse pounding, I shut the bedroom door behind me. How had I behaved? Once more, my phone buzzed. Another Hazel message. "Are you all right? Do you need me to visit you?" I was unsure before responding with, "No, but can we get together for lunch tomorrow? I must speak with you." She replied right away, "Absolutely. Regular time of 12:30. I nodded and collapsed onto the bed, my thoughts racing. There has to be a change. I couldn't bear to live in my own house and always tread carefully. I jumped as I heard a faint knock at the door. "Tiana?" It was James, speaking in an unusually soft tone. "Is it possible for us to talk?" I was split between mistrust and optimism as I gazed at the door. Was this simply another piece of trickery or a peace offering? I took a big breath and got up. Whatever transpired next, one thing was certain. The status could not continue. Time to make a decision. My head sprang open when the alarm went off. With bitterness, I thought about another day in paradise. James hadn't been out of bed since our altercation the previous evening, so his side of the bed was chilly. While I was relieved, a part of me missed the man I had fallen in love with years before. I hated the day ahead and dragged myself out of bed. Mary's voice floated up from downstairs as I entered the corridor. You should definitely talk to Tiana about her behavior, James, my dear. It's just not acceptable. I froze, listening intently for James's answer. Yes, Mom, I understand. I'll take care of it. My stomach turned over. Handle it the same way he had when he'd abandoned me in a sketchy area? I hurriedly took a shower and got dressed since I wanted to get away before I saw them both. But James showed up in the doorway as I grabbed for my car keys. Where are you hurrying? His question sounded very composed. Work, I said, attempting to avoid him. He got in the way of me. We should discuss last night. With a pounding heart, I said, I'm going to be late. He snarled and grabbed my arm, saying, I don't care. You made me feel uncomfortable in front of my mom. You won't be going anywhere until we resolve this. I wrenched my arm free, feeling more angry than afraid. James, sort what out? How is it that your mother treats me like a servant? Or how did you desert me? His expression grew serious. Pay attention to your tone. Mom is only attempting to assist. Aid? I gave a sour laugh. Is that the name you give it? James looked back to see Mary there before he could reply. I'm glad to see you two here. I've developed a list of things that need to be done today, Tiana. I looked at her, astonished. I have to go to work, Mary. She dismissively waved. Your small task can wait, I'm sure. After all, family comes first. Half the bills around here are paid by my little job, I yelled. Mary then gasped and tightly gripped her chest. Do you hear how she talks to me, James? James's face became stern. Now you apologize to my mother. I glanced between them, and for the first time, could see well. I was now living a life torn between a controlling mother-in-law and a husband who would sooner support her than defend his wife. No, I mutely said. What did you say? James's tone was uncomfortably low. I sat up straight and looked him in the eye. I declined. I have said my goodbyes to my existence. I've had enough of attempting to win over unsatisfied individuals. I'm heading to the office. I ignored James's irate cries and Mary's dramatic tears as I rushed past them both. As I started the car, my hands trembled, but as soon as I pulled out of the driveway, an odd calmness descended upon me. After glancing at my face, Hazel at the office invited me into the break area. She pushed a cup of coffee into my hands and commanded, Spill. I told her everything, even James's acts, Mary's unceasing criticism, and the desertion. The weight on my chest decreased with every syllable. When I was done, Hazel replied softly, Tiana, you realize this isn't normal, right? It is abuse what they are doing to you. The word made me wince, but I knew in my heart that she was correct. How am I supposed to proceed? I muttered. She said simply, Leave. You possess strength, talent, and capability. There's no need for them. My phone buzzed before I had a chance to reply. James texted me, saying, Come home now. We must have a conversation. With a weakening determination, I gazed at the television. If you're not here in 30 minutes, don't bother coming back at all, said a second warning that then flashed. Something inside me gave way. I glanced up at Hazel, mentally formulating a strategy. You're accurate. They are not necessary for me. However, I'm not just walking away. They must be aware of what they have done. Hazel's gaze expanded. What are you considering? It was the first time in years that I felt fully alive, and I grinned. It seems like time for a little retaliation. Will you accompany me? Hazel smiled and held my hand. Always. What is the strategy? A surge of enthusiasm shot through me as I started to sketch out my concept. Unaware of what was ahead, James and Mary were about to discover that a woman who is spurned may cause hell to erupt in anger. After my argument with James and Mary, I had been waiting for the other shoe to drop for days, but nothing had occurred. There were no irrational rage fits or passive-aggressive remarks, just a strange silence that unnerved me. Then one evening, out of the blue, James came up to me with an odd sparkle in his eye. "Tiana, I have some thoughts. We've recently been through a difficult time, but I want to put things right." I gave him a cautious look. "Explain what you mean." He grinned, and for a few seconds I thought I saw the man I had fallen in love with. "Our anniversary is approaching. I have a treat planned for you two, a dinner show downtown." A beat skipped in my heart. Is this thing really real? An opportunity to reunite and restore what we had lost? I hesitantly answered, "That sounds wonderful," not daring to dream. James grinned more widely. "Fantastic. This Saturday is it. I'll come get you at 7. I felt a flutter of excitement as he left. Perhaps things were beginning to improve at last. When Saturday finally came, I spent hours preparing because I wanted to take advantage of this chance. I ran outside as James's car drew up, but I stopped when I saw Mary sitting in the passenger seat. She chirped, "Hello, Tiana," her sweet voice making me grit my teeth. "James asked me to go. Is that not considerate?" James gave me an apologetic shrug as I looked at him. "Mom has been depressed recently. I figured that would help her feel better." I tucked my disappointment away and settled into the back seat. What a waste of our lovely evening. James's monotonous answers and Mary's ceaseless talk made for an anxious journey downtown. I wondered how I had gotten here as I gazed out the window. James abruptly stopped in a deserted area. He declared, "I have to make a quick stop. Tiana, will you please hurry over to that store and get some aspirin? It's hurting my brain." Mary said, "Oh yes, and while you're there, be a dear and pick up some mints," before I could object. My breath seems really bad. I sighed as I exited the vehicle and made my way to the little convenience shop. I was startled as a bell jingled overhead as I pushed open the door. As I browsed the aisles looking for aspirin and mints, the cashier gave me a strange look. I was horrified to discover that I had left my purse in the car when I eventually located them and went up to the counter. "I'm so sorry," I stumbled to say. "I have to get my money and go back to the car. I'll return immediately." However, as soon as I went outdoors, my heart stopped. There was nobody on the street. James's vehicle was gone. I was overcome with panic when I realized that they had abandoned me once more. But this time, Mary had also been in on it with James. I reached for my phone, shaking my hands, only to realize it was in my purse, in the car with them. I started to feel angry and frustrated as I took in the strange and dangerous surroundings. How could they have hurt me like this, especially on our anniversary? Men who were hanging around the area spotted my concern and smiled and nudged each other. I was filled with fear as they began to approach me. There was a moment when something inside me broke. I was sick of being the victim and sick of allowing James and Mary to control and mistreat me. Now this is over, I thought angrily. I ignored the clerk's irritated expression and ducked back into the store. I said, "Please, I must use your phone. There is an urgent situation." After a moment of hesitation, he gestured to an old payphone in the corner. I hurried over and called the one number I knew by memory, my fingers shaking in the process. "Hazel," I stated in response, "I'm prepared to carry out our conversation, but I need your assistance. Time to hold them accountable." A plan started to take shape in my head while I waited for Hazel to arrive. James and Mary believed they had broken me, but all they had managed to do was start an uncontrollably strong fire. Did they wish to engage in some gaming? All right. However, they were going to discover that not only could I play, but I played to win. Hazel's vehicle squeaked to a stop in front of the gas station. I hurried outside as soon as I saw my closest buddy, a wave of relief washing over me. Hazel said, "Tiana, oh my God," and threw me into a powerful hug. "How are you doing? What took place?" I told her right away about James's deceit and Mary's involvement. Every statement made Hazel's expression gloomier. She snarled, "That's it. We're not letting them get away with this anymore." I was really determined as we drove to the location of the dinner show. "Hazel, do you recall the strategy we discussed? I believe the timing is right." With a gradual smile, she glanced at me. "You sure?" I nodded, determination building. "They've overextended themselves. This instance finishes tonight." James and Mary were getting seated when we got to the fancy restaurant. I could see them grinning through the glass, probably kicking themselves for such a nasty joke. "Are you ready?" Hazel questioned, holding my hand tightly. Taking a deep breath, I said, "Ready." Heads held high, we marched inside the restaurant. When James saw me, his face became pale, and Mary's mouth fell open in disbelief. "Tiana?" James stumbled, obviously taken aback. I responded in a stern tone, "Did you really think you could just abandon me and get away with it?" Mary bounced back instantly, her voice brimming with pretended worry. "Tiana, please, there has to be a miscommunication. When you didn't come back to the car, we were really concerned." I gave a sour laugh. "Mary, save it. I am fully aware of what the two of you were doing." James got up, his expression furious. "You're making a disturbance. Let's discuss this at home." I shot back, "Oh, we're well past that, James. I think it's time everyone here knew exactly what kind of man you are." Hazel moved forward after saying that, taking out a little gadget from her handbag. She said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special presentation for you tonight," to the now quiet restaurant. Hazel clicked a button, causing a projection to emerge on the restaurant's blank wall before James or Mary could respond. It played clips from our house security cameras, of James scolding me, of Mary always criticizing me, of the emotional abuse I'd lived through for years. The crowd gasped as I revealed the truth about my life. James lunged for Hazel, but I moved to be in his way. "Touch her, and I'll have you arrested for assault," I told him. James's fury contorted his features. "Do you believe this will have any effect? Tiana, without me, you are nothing. Nothing." His comments, which had stung so much before, seemed so little now. "No, James, I didn't mean anything to you, but that is now over." I turned to face the startled audience and continued, "This is the truth about emotional abuse. It must end because it is sneaky and destructive." Murmurs of support went through the throng. An old woman with tears in her eyes walked over. "My darling, you are so brave. Stop allowing them to cause you pain." As the tide began to turn against them, Mary made one final attempt at manipulation. "Please, Tiana, we're family. We can resolve this." I firmly met her stare. "No, Mary, we're not related. Family doesn't behave like this with one another." I got a feeling of resolution and closure when security showed up there to usher James and Mary away. With a proud smile on her face, Hazel put an arm around me and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. "Tiana, you succeeded. You defied them." I nodded while feeling a range of emotions. "It's not over yet," I said. "This is just the beginning." I knew I had reached a tipping point when we witnessed Mary and James being carried away in shame. I was terrified of the future for the first time in years, but there was no turning back now. Filled with intense determination, I turned to Hazel. "Let's get this done. Time to take back my life." With our heads held high, prepared to take on whatever was ahead, we left the restaurant. The me of fear and meekness had vanished. A woman who was willing to battle for her value and recognized it stood in her position. Unaware of what was ahead, James and Mary were about to discover that nothing stokes a woman's rage like a woman who has been disregarded and given authority. As Hazel and I walked into the grand ballroom for the anniversary dinner performance, my heart was pounding. Unaware of the drama that was about to unfold, people mixed and joked in the excitedly buzzing room. "Are you ready for this?" Hazel gripped my hand and murmured. I nodded and got ready. As ready as I'll ever be. This was the moment we had been carefully preparing for last week. Hazel had become the evening's MC under her contacts in the events sector. I was feeling a little nervous and excited at the same time as she took the stage. Hazel's voice boomed out, quieting the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's special performance. This evening, we have a very special presentation for you. A story of love, betrayal, and redemption." I glanced around the room and saw Mary and James close to the front. They were perplexed, obviously unprepared for this change of events. Hazel went on, her voice growing solemn. "Before we begin, I'd like to share a real-life story with you all. A story about a woman named Tiana." James's eyes widened as he grasped what was going on, and his head sprang up. He turned to stand, but Mary caught hold of his arm and pressed an urgent whisper into his ear. Our home's security camera video, voicemails, and text messages, all proof of the years-long emotional abuse I had suffered, started to play on the big screen behind Hazel. James's harsh remarks, "Tiana, you are worthless," resonated through the room, causing gasps. "Without me, you would be nothing." Mary's venomous voice trailed after. "Tiana, really? If you are unable to keep your home clean, I don't know how you expect to be a good wife." The looks on the audience's faces changed from disbelief to indignation. While some appeared prepared to face James and Mary directly, others were sobbing. The whispers were broken by Hazel's voice. "Emotional abuse really occurs like this. It ruins lives and is silent and sneaky. However, we're ending that quiet tonight." All eyes turned to me as she made a motion in my direction. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to the real Tiana Brown." While I made my way to the platform, my legs felt heavy. James straightened, fury contorting his features. He said, "Tiana, don't you dare." "A security guard," Mr. William intervened, placing a hand on James's shoulder. As I reached the microphone, I took a deep breath. This was it. There was no turning back. "For years," I began, my voice trembling slightly, "I've lived in fear. I've been belittled, manipulated, and made to feel worthless. But no more." I locked eyes with James, feeling a surge of strength. "James Wilson, I want you to hear this loud and clear. I am divorcing you. I am reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my freedom." The audience exploded in cheers. I watched as Mary attempted to pull James in the direction of the exit, but security intervened. "Mary," I said again, my voice getting louder. "You can no longer mistreat and manipulate me. You two didn't think they could break me. Instead, you strengthened me." Years of suffering and rage spilled out of me as I talked. The audience was ecstatic and clearly supported every word. James abruptly leapt over the security guy and raced in the direction of the stage. He said, "You're ungrateful. After everything I've done for you." I could see the desperation of a man losing control and the rage in James's eyes, and time seemed to slow down. I was momentarily overcome with fear. Had I pushed too far? However, a few audience members pushed James to the ground before he could get to me. His cries reverberated across the ballroom as security hauled him away. I came to a significant realization at that very moment. I was no longer terrified. I faced the microphone once more, speaking clearly and steadily. "You are not alone if you are suffering in silence. Everyone out there. Because of your strength, you merit better." Tears ran down my cheeks as the audience went into a standing ovation. But these were tears of liberation, optimism, and relief for the first time in years. Hurrying to my side, Hazel gave me a tight hug. She murmured, "Tiana, you did it. You're free." I could see that she was correct as I peered out over the sea of smiling faces. I had won the struggle for my soul at that very moment, but the legal battle still remained ahead. There would never be a like thing. My statement in public was met with chaos. James thrashed and swore, while security personnel battled to hold him back. Mary's high-pitched voice broke through the din. "You spiteful bastard! After all of our assistance to you!" Despite my heart pounding, I held my ground and spoke in a calm tone. "You've tried to crush my spirit, abuse me, and manipulate me, but that's no longer the case." James was able to loosen his grip briefly as he was being carried toward the door. His ferocious gaze latched onto mine. He said, "You think this is over? I'll obliterate you, Tiana. By the time I'm done with you, you will have nothing." Even though I was shivering, I didn't express my dread. Hazel moved to the front and stood between James and me. "You are the only person who's finished here, James," she remarked icily. When James and Mary were eventually led out of the ballroom by security, their irate yells subsided. Supportive remarks and startled whispers filled the crowd. Tears filled the eyes of an old woman who came over to me. "My darling, you are so brave. I wish I had possessed your bravery years ago." The question she posed, how many others had suffered in silence like I had, really affected me. My phone abruptly buzzed and I received a text from an unknown number that said, "Tiana, you'll regret this. Be mindful of your surroundings." With shaking hands, I showed Hazel. I said, "It's starting already." She gave me a shoulder squeeze. "We knew this wouldn't be easy, but you're not alone anymore." Just then, a man in a dapper suit came over to us. "I'm an attorney named David Lawson. Mrs. Wilson, I'd like to provide my services without charge. I want to make sure you receive the justice you are due because what you have gone through is intolerable." Before I could reply, a different voice spoke out. "And from the Women's Crisis Center, I'm Caroline Chen. We can support you during this change using our resources." I looked at Hazel, who gave me an encouraging nod, overwhelmed. "See? You now have assistance." There was a gathering outside the ballroom as we were leaving. The event had gained rapid notoriety, and I was dazzled by the flashing camera as reporters yelled questions. "How long have you been the victim of this assault, Mrs. Wilson? Do you think your husband will take revenge on you? What advice would you provide other women who are in violent relationships?" I paused, feeling the moment's weight bearing down on me. I hadn't expected this to be more. What if my statement was incorrect? What happens if James turns this on me? Sensing my worry, Hazel intervened. "No comments at this time. Please respect Mrs. Wilson's privacy." We were pushing through the throng when I saw my former art gallery employer. "Tiana," she exclaimed, "if you need a job, there's always a place for you with us." My eyes filled with tears. Here was a link to my former life, to my real self, after years of hiding. When we arrived at Hazel's car, we closed the door on the mayhem outside. I sagged into the chair, feeling overburdened and fatigued. "What have I done, Hazel?" I muttered. "James is correct. He will attempt to ruin me." "What if everything goes wrong?" Hazel looked up at me, her face intense. "Listen to me, Tiana," Hazel admonished. "The greatest war is already won by you. You've taken back your dignity and voice. We'll tackle everything else together." My phone buzzed once more as we were leaving. James texted me again saying, "I hope you had fun with your little show. I'll see you in court." I was feeling both anxiety and resolve as I looked at the message. It would be a difficult and maybe hazardous journey ahead. Mary would employ every cunning tactic in her repertoire to ensure that James didn't give up without a fight. But there was a glimmer of optimism as I turned to face Hazel and considered the help I'd received this evening. I wasn't fighting my struggles by myself for the first time in a long time. I straightened my shoulders and inhaled deeply, saying in a louder voice than I felt, "Okay. What's our next move?" Hazel smiled, resolved, shining in her eyes. "Now, we fight back and we win." I knew the fight was far from done as we raced into the darkness, but at last I felt prepared for combat. Mary and James were clueless about what was ahead of them. The lady they attempted to break was ready to reveal her true strength to them. Tension filled the courtroom as I sat down, Hazel's comforting presence at my side. James sat with his attorney across the aisle, his expression a mask of icy rage. Mary followed closely, her eyes narrowing with hate. The bailiff said, "All rise," as Judge Harriet Simmons arrived. Hope flickered through me. She was well known for rendering just decisions in domestic issues. "We're here today for the divorce proceedings of Tiana Brown versus James Wilson," Judge Simmons said. "I understand there are some unusual circumstances surrounding this case." James's attorney rose to his feet, sounding falsely worried. James's attorney opened the case by saying, "Your Honor, my client has been the victim of a terrible slander campaign. Mrs. Wilson's actions in public were only an attempt to attract attention." I felt the wrath rising in my chest and tightened my hands. But before I could respond, David Lawson, my attorney, was up and about. "Your Honor, we have extensive evidence of Mr. Wilson's emotional abuse and manipulation, including security footage, emails, and eyewitness accounts from the night Mrs. Wilson bravely spoke out." I observed James's expression as David went over the material. His calm veneer shattered to show his anger within. Mary moved in her chair uneasily, perhaps sensing that her part in the abuse was going to come to light. Upon my turn to testify, I inhaled deeply and made my way over to the witness stand. I gave James a straight look and spoke up in a stern but unambiguous manner. I lived in terror for many years. I was denigrated, tricked, and made to feel unworthy. However, as I stand here now, I see that the only thing that made my life useless was the treatment I received. I faced the magistrate. "I'm not simply requesting a divorce, Your Honor. I want to be given the opportunity to take back my life, my honor, and my future." I saw Mary's expression as I made my way back to my seat. I noticed a glimmer of uncertainty in her eyes for the first time. In order to assess the evidence, the judge requested a brief recess. When she came back, her demeanor was determined, even if those minutes felt like hours. "I'm awarding the divorce in Mrs. Brown's favor due to the overwhelming evidence of emotional abuse and manipulation," declared Judge Simmons. "Mr. Wilson, you're going to pay the alimony and the legal bills for Mrs. Brown. In addition, I'm putting in place a protective order against you and Mary Macy, your mother." I felt a rush of relief sweep over me. I was let free. It was finished. James let out a loud cry and shot up. "This is really ridiculous." He yelled, "You can't do this to me," while being detained by security. Mary came up and begged, "Please, Tiana, let's figure this out. We are family." I met her stare with a tall stance. "No, Mary, we are not related. The way you handled me is not how family members treat one another." I looked at Hazel as James and Mary were led away, their irate yells fading. As we embraced, tears fell on our faces. She murmured, "Tiana, you did it. You're free." There was a modest audience assembled outside the courtroom. I was shocked to see familiar faces. Neighbors who had seen James's brutality, my former co-workers from the art gallery, and even a few attendees of the dinner show. My old employer came forward. "Tiana, the job offer still stands whenever you're ready." I was so overwhelmed by the encouragement that all I could do was nod. A shy young woman came up to me as Hazel and I were navigating the crowd. "Mrs. Brown, your narrative inspired me to end my own violent partnership. I'm grateful." I knew then that my suffering had not been in vain. By speaking up, I could have saved others from going through the same fate. A few weeks later, I was standing in my new apartment's entryway, with boxes all over the place. Hazel materialized behind me, beaming, carrying one additional package. She said, "Welcome home, Rumi." Grinning, I surveyed the area that was all mine, a representation of my newly discovered liberty and self-reliance. My phone rang with David's text message while we were unpacking. "I've heard that Mary and James departed town. Seems like they were unable to withstand the criticism." Hazel and I both laughed in shock when I showed her. It truly was over. I felt at ease that evening, sitting on the balcony with a bottle of wine that I hadn't felt in a long time. "You know, I'm excited about the future for the first time in a long time," I replied, looking out at the city lights. Hazel tapped her drink against mine. "Here's to new beginnings, and to the amazing woman who fought for her freedom." During our toast, it dawned on me that although my road had been difficult, it had brought me to a position of resilience, self-reliance, and optimism. Although James and Mary had attempted to shatter me, they had ultimately strengthened me. With my eyes fixed on the future, I knew the great